In the shimmering heart of San Francisco, Julian Banks has it all: fame, fortune, and a name synonymous with success. But one evening, a single act of exclusion at an elite restaurant turns his world upside down. Crown Hearth isn't just denying Julian and his friends a seat at the table. It's making a statement about who belongs and who doesn't. Humiliated but not broken, Julian decides to fight back in the most unexpected way. With the help of his son, Ezra, and a group of loyal friends, he sets out to create the Hearth for All, a dining experience that celebrates inclusion and diversity, offering a place for voices silenced far too long. But as the Hearth for All grows into a nationwide movement, Julian uncovers dark secrets tying Crown Hearth to the same forces that crushed his mother's dreams decades earlier. And in a shocking twist, the man who humiliated him, the restaurant's manager, Anton Rourke, is revealed to be his estranged half-brother, harboring a grudge rooted in betrayal and family secrets. Caught between justice and forgiveness, Julian must decide. Will he dismantle the system that rejected him, or find a way to reconcile his fractured past? The Empty Table is a story of resilience, redemption, and the enduring fight to ensure everyone has a place to belong. Julian stood on the balcony of his San Francisco home. The city stretched out before him like a living, breathing canvas. The early morning sunlight glinted off the bay, painting everything in hues of gold. Coffee in hand, he leaned on the railing, lost in thought. Big day today? Ezra's voice broke the silence. Julian turned to see his son, still in his pajamas, dreadlocks a little messy from sleep. He smiled. Not really. Just dinner with friends. Ezra leaned against the doorway. Crown Hearth, right? Fancy. You sure it's worth it? Julian chuckled. It's not about the restaurant, Jay. It's about celebrating with people who've stuck by me. Besides, you'll see. It's not as pretentious as it sounds. Ezra raised an eyebrow. We'll see. Julian glanced at a framed photo on the side table. His mother, apron-clad, standing proudly in front of her tiny cafe. The memory of her struggles always fueled his drive to succeed. The group arrived at Crown Hearth just as the city lights began to twinkle. The restaurant's sleek glass exterior gleamed under the streetlights, a beacon of exclusivity. Wow, Delilah said, adjusting her earrings. This place is giving me VIP vibes. Relax, Tyrell replied, tugging at his hoodie under a blazer. It's just a restaurant, Sienna smirked. A restaurant with a year-long wait list. Julian, you sure we're not overdressed? Julian smiled. You're perfect. Let's go. Inside, the ambience was almost overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung low, and the murmur of quiet conversations filled the air. The hostess looked up as Julian approached. Good evening. Reservation for Banks. Party of 6. The hostess's smile faltered briefly before returning. One moment, she disappeared into the back, leaving the group standing awkwardly in the lobby. Is it me? Sienna whispered. Or did she look surprised? Julian shrugged, probably checking the list. But a strange unease began to creep in. Minutes stretched uncomfortably. Other guests arrived and were seated promptly, but Julian's group remained standing. Finally, a tall man in a sharp suit emerged from the back. His presence radiated authority, but his expression was cold. Mr. Banks, he said, I'm Anton Rourke, the manager. I'm afraid there's been an error. Your reservation doesn't appear in our system. Julian frowned. That's impossible. I confirmed this morning. Anton's smile was tight. Unfortunately, we're fully booked tonight. Sienna crossed her arms. Fully booked? We just saw 3 open tables. They're reserved, Anton replied curtly. Delilah stepped forward. So were we. Anton's gaze sharpened. We treat all our guests equally, Mississippi. If there's no reservation, there's no table. Julian raised a hand, calming his friends. Look, we don't want trouble. Can you double-check? We've planned this for weeks. I've already checked, Anton said, his tone dismissive. The sting of humiliation settled over the group. Julian felt the weight of the room's stares, the whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. Let's go, he said quietly, leading his friends out. Outside, the cool evening air was a sharp contrast to the tension radiating from the group. That was garbage, Tyrell said, pacing on the sidewalk. You saw the way he looked at us. Delilah nodded. Like we didn't belong. Sienna's voice was tight with anger. It wasn't just about the reservation. It's about us, who we are. Julian rubbed his temple. I don't want to jump to conclusions. Sienna whirled on him. Are you serious? Julian, that wasn't a mistake. That was deliberate. Ezra, who had been quiet, finally spoke. She's right, Dad. They didn't even try to hide it. Julian glanced back at the glowing Crown Hearth sign. Something in his chest tightened, a mix of anger and shame. Let's not let this ruin the night, he said. We'll figure this out later. But deep down, he knew they wouldn't forget this moment. Late that night, Julian sat alone in his living room, the soft hum of the city drifting through the windows. The humiliation replayed in his mind. The dismissive tone, the condescending smile. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Sienna, posted about tonight. People are already sharing similar stories. Check it out. Julian opened the link to find a flood of comments on her post. Happened to us last month. Totally intentional. I thought it was just me. Thank you for speaking up. Ezra walked in, rubbing his eyes. You're still up? Just thinking, Julian said. Ezra sat down. You can't just let this go. I know, Julian replied, but I want to do more than complain. I want to change something. Ezra leaned forward. What if you made a place that couldn't turn anyone away? Somewhere people like us would always feel welcome. Julian's lips curved into a small smile. You mean, build our own table? Exactly. Julian grabbed a notepad and began to jot down ideas. As the first rays of dawn crept into the room, the words "The Hearth for All" stood boldly at the top of the page. This chapter takes the concept of the hearth for all from an idea to the first steps of execution, showing Julian rallying his allies and facing initial obstacles. Julian's living room, where he's gathered Sienna, Tyrell, Delilah, and Ezra to share his vision. Julian paced the living room, his notebook clutched in one hand. I don't want this to just be about us. What happened at Crown Hearth wasn't unique. It's part of something bigger. You're thinking activism? Sienna asked, leaning back on the couch. Because I'm all for that, but it can't just be one angry Instagram post. Not activism exactly, Julian replied. Something tangible. A space where people can feel welcomed, celebrated. A dining experience that brings people together, like my mother's cafe used to. Ezra perked up. The Hearth for All. Delilah smiled. The name's got a nice ring to it. Tyrell raised an eyebrow. Okay, I love the idea, but how do we pull this off? Chefs, venues, funding. That's a lot to figure out. We start small, Julian said, his voice steady. A pop-up dinner. One night to show what this could be. If it works, we expand. The group exchanged glances. Finally, Sienna nodded. I'm in. But you better believe I'll hold you accountable for every detail. Same here. Tyrell added. I can film it. Get the story out there. Delilah clapped her hands. And I'll bring the music. Ezra leaned forward. Let's make this happen. The shuttered cafe Julian's mother once owned. Dust-covered tables and faded photos lined the walls. The cafe was quiet, almost frozen in time. Julian ran his fingers along the counter, memories flooding back. She used to stand right here, he said, his voice soft. She'd be so proud of this idea. Ezra walked over, picking up a photo of a smiling woman holding a tray of pastries. Grandma was a fighter, wasn't she? The strongest person I've ever known, Julian replied. She wanted to create something for the community, but the world didn't make it easy for her. Ezra set the photo down. Then let's make sure this works. For her. Julian nodded, a renewed sense of purpose in his chest. A series of conversations with local chefs, most of whom are hesitant to join. Julian and Tyrell sat in the back of a small bakery, the smell of fresh bread in the air. Across from them was Chef Anna, a talented but cautious culinary artist. It's a beautiful idea, Anna said, folding her hands. But you're asking me to risk everything. What if it fails? What if Crown Hearth blacklists me for being involved? We're not competing with them, Julian assured her. We're creating something different, something meaningful. Anna hesitated. I need time to think. As they left, Tyrell shook his head. That's the third maybe today. People are scared, man. Julian stopped, looking out at the bustling street. We only need one yes to start. That evening, Julian received a call from Anna. I'll do it, she said, but only because I believe in what you're trying to build. Julian's living room, where Delilah shares the buzz growing on social media after her emotional post. Look at this, Delilah said, handing Julian her phone. Her post about their experience at Crown Hearth had gone viral, with thousands of likes and comments. Finally, someone's speaking up. This happens more often than people realize. I'd support a place like the Hearth for all in a heartbeat. People are listening, she said. Julian scrolled through the comments. They're not just listening, they're ready to act. Ezra tapped his own phone. I've been getting messages too. Musicians, artists, even a couple of chefs. They want to help. We're building momentum, Sienna said. Let's not waste it. A morning news segment where Anton Rourke dismisses Julian's efforts as a publicity stunt. Julian sat at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched as he watched the screen. This so-called movement is just a vanity project, Anton said smoothly. Crown Hearth has always prioritized excellence and diversity. Mr. Banks seems to be leveraging an unfortunate misunderstanding for attention. Unbelievable, Sienna muttered, pacing the room. He's trying to discredit everything we're building. Delilah shook her head. We can't let this derail us. It won't, Julian said firmly. People see through him. But this means we need to be even better. No room for mistakes. Ezra leaned forward. So we keep pushing. We make sure the Hearth for all isn't just an idea. We make it undeniable. A derelict warehouse in San Francisco, dusty and filled with potential. This, Ezra said, spinning around to take in the cavernous space. This is your big idea? It's perfect, Tyrell replied, pointing at the high ceilings and exposed brick. Raw, authentic. It'll look amazing on camera once we fix it up. Julian surveyed the space, imagining long tables, string lights, and music echoing through the walls. It's not about the building, it's about what we make of it. Sienna ran her hand along a dusty beam. It'll take a lot of work, but I can see it. This place could be something special. Ezra smirked. Fine. But if we're pulling this off, I'm not sweeping floors. Deal, Julian said with a laugh. But you're in charge of the sound system. A bustling cafe where Julian and Sienna meet Chef Anna and musician Malik, new recruits for the event. Community is the soul of food, Anna said, stirring her coffee. What you're doing, giving people a place to feel seen. I want to be part of that. Julian nodded. We couldn't do this without you. Your cooking will set the tone for the night. Across the table, Malik leaned back, his guitar case beside him. I've played gigs where people barely look up from their plates. But this feels like something bigger. It is, Sienna said, her voice firm. It's about proving we belong. All of us. Julian extended a hand to Malik. Welcome to the team. Malik shook it, grinning. Let's make some noise. Julian's home, where the team gathers to strategize after Anton's latest smear campaign. Tyrell burst into the living room, phone in hand. Have you seen this? He played a clip of Anton speaking on a morning show. Mr. Banks's event is exclusionary, Anton said, his tone smooth. It's not about inclusion. It's about division, Delilah groaned. He's flipping the script. How do we fight that? We don't engage with him, Sienna said firmly. We stick to our message. Let the work speak for itself. But what if people believe him? Ezra asked. Julian leaned forward. Then we show them the truth. No mudslinging. Just heart and hard work. A quiet corner of the warehouse, where Julian confronts an unexpected revelation. Tyrell handed Julian a folder, his expression grim. You need to see this. Inside were documents tying Anton Rourke to Julian's father. Photos, correspondence, proof they shared the same bloodline. Julian's breath caught. He's my brother? I thought you should know, Tyrell said, before the event. In case he tries to use it against you. Julian closed the folder, his mind racing. This doesn't change what we're doing, but it explains a lot. Are you okay? Tyrell asked. No, Julian admitted, but I will be. The transformed warehouse, alive with music, laughter, and the aroma of food. The tables were set, the lights twinkling like stars. Guests filled the space, a vibrant mix of backgrounds and stories. Julian stood at the entrance, welcoming each person personally. Thank you for being here, he said, shaking hands and exchanging smiles. Inside, Malik's band played soulful melodies while Anna's dishes drew murmurs of delight. Ezra managed the soundboard, giving his father a thumbs up. Sienna approached Julian, a rare smile on her face. Look at this. You did it. We did it, Julian corrected. As the night went on, Julian took the stage, his voice steady. This isn't just about one dinner. It's about showing the world that everyone deserves a seat at the table. The applause was deafening, the energy electric. Julian knew this was just the beginning. A private meeting in Julian's home, where a former Crown Hearth employee shares explosive insights. Julian opened the door to find Chef Marco standing on his porch, clutching a folder. Marco's weary eyes darted around before stepping inside. Thank you for meeting me, Marco said, his voice trembling. I've wanted to talk for years, but it's okay, Julian reassured him. You're safe here. Take your time. Marco placed the folder on the table and took a deep breath. Crown Hearth wasn't just about exclusivity. They had an unspoken policy. Certain people weren't welcome. Guests, staff, suppliers. If you didn't fit their image, you were out. Sienna leaned forward. What do you mean by image? Marco hesitated before saying, white, wealthy, connected. I saw talented chefs dismissed, diners turned away, all because they didn't look the part, Julian's jaw tightened. And they got away with this? Anton made sure of it, Marco said. Anyone who questioned it was silenced, or worse. Julian glanced at Sienna, who nodded. This is bigger than we thought, she said. Sienna's law office, where she digs into Crown Hearth's ownership and connections. Sienna's desk was buried under papers, and her laptop hummed as she searched through records. Tyrell paced behind her. Found anything yet? He asked. Plenty, Sienna replied, clicking through files. Crown Hearth is tied to an elite network of investors, power players who control access to industries across the city. It's not just about the restaurant. It's about keeping certain people in power. Gatekeepers, Tyrell muttered. And they've been doing this for how long? Decades, Sienna said, her voice steely. This is systemic exclusion, plain and simple. We need to expose it. Julian needs to see this, Tyrell said. Sienna nodded. And he needs to decide how far he's willing to go. A tense confrontation between Julian and Anton at Crown Hearth. Julian stood in the Crown Hearth lobby, facing Anton. The tension between them was palpable. What are you doing here? Anton asked, his tone icy. I know the truth, Julian said, stepping closer. About you. About our father. Anton's expression flickered for a moment before hardening. So you've done your homework. Congratulations. Now what? You've been targeting me, haven't you? Julian said. This was never just about the restaurant. Anton smirked. Of course it's personal. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up in his shadow, knowing he abandoned me for your perfect little family? Julian's anger gave way to a pang of guilt. I didn't know, he admitted. But that doesn't justify what you've done. Anton's voice rose. You had everything handed to you. Fame, fortune, respect. All I had was a name that meant nothing. Julian stared at him, torn between rage and pity. This doesn't have to end in destruction, Anton. We could fix this together. Anton laughed bitterly. Fix it? You don't fix a system you've benefited from. You just keep winning. Julian's home, where the team debates their next move. Sienna slapped a thick file onto the table. We have enough to bury Crown Hearth. And Anton. Julian looked at the file, his expression unreadable. And then what? This isn't just about him. It's the whole system. Exposing him would be a start, Tyrell argued. People deserve to know what's been happening. Delilah chimed in. But will it fix anything? Or just shift the blame to one person while the system keeps going? Julian leaned back, deep in thought. If we make this about revenge, we lose the point of what we're building. The Hearth for All is about creating, not destroying. Ezra spoke up. So we keep focusing on us? On making this bigger than them? Julian nodded. Exactly. Let the truth come out through the movement, not through tearing someone down. The Hearth for All venue, where Julian and his team finalized plans for their next event. The warehouse buzzed with activity as chefs prepped dishes and musicians rehearsed. Julian walked through the space, taking it all in. Sienna joined him, holding a clipboard. We've got double the attendees from last time, and press coverage lined up. Good, Julian said. This has to be perfect. It will be, Sienna replied. But are you ready for what comes next? The more attention we get, the harder they'll push back. Julian smiled. Let them. We're not stopping. As the team gathered for a final run-through, Julian addressed them. What we're doing here isn't just about food or music. It's about belonging. Every person who walks through these doors will feel that. And no one, no system, no person, can take that away from us. The team cheered, their resolve stronger than ever. Julian's living room, where the team gathers to watch a news segment featuring the Hearth for All. Here it is, Tyrell called, turning up the volume. On screen, a polished anchor introduced the segment. In San Francisco, a bold new initiative called the Hearth for All is transforming the dining experience into a celebration of diversity and community. The footage showed long tables filled with smiling guests, chefs plating vibrant dishes, and musicians performing. Sienna smirked. Not bad for a little pop-up, huh? Julian sat back, a mix of pride and exhaustion on his face. It's not just ours anymore. People are taking this and running with it. Ezra, scrolling on his phone, chimed in. Chicago just announced their first event. Same concept, same name. Delilah clapped her hands. We're spreading, baby. But Julian's smile faded slightly. We have to keep the heart of it intact. If we lose sight of what this means, it's just another trend. Outside Crown Hearth, where a growing protest gathers, a crowd waved signs reading, "Everyone deserves a seat," and "End gatekeeping now." Reporters jostled for interviews as protesters chanted. Inside, Anton paced his office. "This is out of control," he muttered, glaring at a report detailing the restaurant's financial losses. His assistant hesitated. "The protests are killing reservations. And with those employee testimonies..." Anton slammed the folder shut. "What do they want? A public apology? A diversity campaign? We'll do whatever it takes." The assistant shifted uncomfortably. "It might be too late for that, sir." Anton's eyes narrowed. "Then it's time to remind the world who Julian Banks really is." Julian's kitchen, where he and Ezra clash over priorities. "You missed the rehearsal," Ezra said, crossing his arms. "Again." Julian sighed, rubbing his temples. "Ezra, I'm juggling a lot right now. The next event..." "I get it," Ezra interrupted. "The Hearth for All is everything. But what about me? You keep saying this is for the future, but I'm standing right here." Julian paused, guilt flashing across his face. "You're right. I've been so focused I haven't. Look, I'll make it up to you." "When?" Ezra shot back. "After the next dinner? The next protest? Dad, I'm proud of what you're doing, but I need you too." Ezra stormed out, leaving Julian alone with the weight of his choices. A private meeting between Anton and Julian at a neutral cafe. Julian sat across from Anton, arms crossed. "You wanted to talk?" Anton slid a file across the table. "A gift. Everything you need to take me and Crown Hearth down. Employee contracts, emails, all of it." Julian didn't touch the file. "Why?" Anton leaned back, a bitter smile on his face. "Because if I'm going down, I want to do it on my terms. And maybe," he hesitated, "maybe I'm tired of fighting you." Julian's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about redemption. What's your angle?" Anton's jaw tightened. "Let's just say I want to be remembered for more than my mistakes." Julian stood, leaving the file untouched. "You want to fix this? Start by owning what you did." Outside Crown Hearth, where news breaks of the restaurant's closure, the team stood in silence, staring at their phones. Headlines blared. Crown Hearth closes amid scandal and protests. Delilah broke the silence. "We did it." Julian shook his head. "This isn't about us. This is about what they built finally crumbling under its own weight." Tyrell nodded. "And it's proof that the system can be challenged." Sienna placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. "But it's not over. Now's the time to make sure the Hearth for All becomes the new standard." Julian looked at Ezra, who gave him a small nod. "Then let's make sure we get it right." Outside the shuttered Crown Hearth, where Julian and Ezra visit to mark the turning point, Julian stood in front of the now-empty Crown Hearth building. Its once polished facade had lost its luster. The sign above the door faded and unlit. Beside him, Ezra crossed his arms. "This feels weird," Ezra said. "Like we're standing over a grave." "It kind of is," Julian replied. "A grave for the old way of doing things." Ezra glanced at his father. "Do you think we did the right thing? I mean, they're out of business. People lost jobs." Julian sighed. "I've thought about that a lot. But this was never about revenge. It was about building something better." He placed a hand on Ezra's shoulder. "Sometimes, things have to end so new things can grow." Ezra nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Then let's focus on what we're building." A massive repurposed warehouse, filled with vibrant decorations, music, and energy. The room buzzed with life. Long communal tables stretched across the space, adorned with flowers and candles. Chefs moved between stations, plating dishes that showcased their cultural heritage. Musicians filled the air with melodies, creating an atmosphere of celebration. Julian stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. "This is incredible," Sienna said, walking up beside him. "We've doubled attendance from last year." "It's not about the numbers," Julian replied. "It's about the feeling. Look at them." He gestured to the crowd, where people from all walks of life shared stories and laughter. "This is what it's all about." Delilah took the stage, her soulful voice silencing the room. She sang a song about resilience and belonging, leaving many in the audience wiping their eyes. As she finished, Julian stepped forward, addressing the crowd. "A year ago, we started with a simple idea, that everyone deserves a seat at the table. Tonight, we prove that idea isn't just a dream. It's a reality." The room erupted into applause. The team gathers in a smaller room off the main event to discuss the future of the hearth for all. Julian sat at a table surrounded by Sienna, Tyrell, Delilah, and Ezra. Papers and laptops cluttered the space as they brainstormed the next steps. "I've been thinking," Sienna said, "it's time to formalize this. Make the Hearth for All a non-profit." Tyrell nodded. "We can expand, help other cities set up their own events. Turn this into a nationwide movement." Julian leaned back, a smile tugging at his lips. "It's bigger than us now. We've created something people believe in." Ezra spoke up, "And we need to make sure it stays true to the original vision. No matter how big it gets, it has to stay about the people." "Agreed," Julian said. "Let's do this." A quiet cafe, where Julian meets Anton for a final conversation. Anton sat at a corner table, looking smaller than Julian remembered. His usually sharp demeanor had softened. "You came," Anton said as Julian approached. "I almost didn't," Julian admitted, sitting across from him. "But I realized I didn't want this to end in silence." Anton sighed. "I've made mistakes, more than I can count. But what I did to you, it was personal. And I'm sorry." Julian studied his half-brother, searching for sincerity. "I can't excuse what you did, but I can forgive you." Anton looked up, his eyes misty. "You're a better man than I am." "It's not about being better," Julian said. "It's about letting go. For both of us." As Julian left the cafe, he felt a weight lift. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it made moving forward possible. The main event space, where Julian stands surrounded by family, friends, and supporters. The night was winding down, but the energy in the room remained electric. Julian stood with Ezra, watching as guests lingered, sharing stories and laughter. "You did it," Ezra said. "We did it," Julian corrected. Sienna joined them, a glass of wine in hand. "This is just the beginning, you know? What you've built, it's going to outlive all of us. That's the goal," Julian said. As the final guests left and the lights dimmed, Julian took one last look at the room. It wasn't just about the events or the food. It was about the people, their stories, their connections. Turning to Ezra, he said, "You ready to carry this forward someday?" Ezra grinned. "With you by my side, sure." Julian smiled, pulling his son into a hug. This wasn't just a victory. It was the start of something that would last for generations.